it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing another deck collection and declutter, and we're going to be looking at what I think is, or what should be, decks from my vintage basket. So as you can see, this basket is a little bit overflowing, so I do feel like I need to do a little bit of decluttering here because I don't need this many vintage decks. I don't work with that energy all that much, and it's a very specific energy for me, so let's go through and see what we've got. Looking at the decks in this basket, this is going to be a hard one. I don't know if I'm going to be able to actually declutter much because it's not only vintage decks, but it's also collage style decks that have a vintage lean. And I do have a love for collage style decks. So let's start with what I think is the newest one, and this is the Peculiar Pathways Tarot. This is a recent Kickstarter that came in that I backed pretty much, I think, as soon as it became available. And I was really excited about this one because I do have the Coastal Curiosities by this creator, and I absolutely love it. This one has this beautiful matte seafoam green edging, and it's just amazing. So this collage deck is my absolute favorite style of collage. It's minimal in terms of collage, right? It also has the full color background with the black and white illustrations, and I absolutely love that. I feel like that just creates this really unique dynamic within the art itself. It's a very unique sort of energy. And while I do have a few other decks that do something similar, this deck does it so beautifully, so succinctly, that I feel like if I'm looking for a collage style deck that has this black and white illustration artwork mixed in, this is the deck that I'm going to go for. There's one other deck that I have that does that, but it exists in a totally different space, and it's in a totally different basket, even though it's a similar sort of collage. I really haven't worked with this deck that much because it is fairly new to my collection, but I feel like if I wanted this vintage style art and I wanted collage, this would probably be the deck that I would go to. It's got such a beautiful aesthetic to it. It feels very cozy. It feels like fall in that sense, like the cozy fall energy. Not necessarily fall always in terms of the aesthetic of it. Some of them feel a bit more like maybe early spring, but I think it's just got a great energy, and it's one that I'm definitely looking forward to working with this season. I haven't worked with it much because, like I said, it's very new to my collection, so we'll see where it ends up fitting. It's just an absolutely gorgeously produced deck. I am in love with everything done on the cards. Also, there's no people, and like y'all know if you've been around here for a while, I absolutely love decks that do not have people because I feel like it really opens it up for me, and I'm not sort of locked into seeing things through a particular lens. So this one I'm definitely looking forward to getting to know, so it is not going anywhere in my collection. Maybe we'll see if we have anything that it pairs with. That's always a fun thing. So let's jump into the other two decks that were just like sitting on top of this basket. Ironically enough, everything fits in this basket if I just don't have these three decks. But I think these are the three decks that I actually do want to keep, so we'll have to take a look at the other ones. I do believe that both of these are out of print now, although I could be wrong, and I will always have links below whenever I can. This particular deck is the Antiquarian Tarot, and I have edged mine. And this deck is a gorgeous, this deck is again another gorgeous collage deck. It does use primarily photographs, so it has a completely different energy. And even though I just said I like decks without people, there is a time and a place for people. I mean, the majority of my decks have people, right? Because the majority of tarot has people in it. This one has photographs, and it has a very vintage kind of ancestral type of energy to it. And if I wanted to work with ancestor energy in a way that was more like maybe cultural or blood lineage ancestors, I feel like this would be the deck that I might pull towards. I had mentioned in another declutter video how I have the Heindel Tarot, and that is ancestry to like a primordial sense. This feels like more recent ancestry to me. And I think that's the reason that I hang on to this deck, because while ancestor work is not a thing that I do right now, it's definitely something that I've thought about doing, and I may dabble with at some point, you know, in my practice in one of my many studies. And when I get to that point, this is the deck that I want to use for that, because it definitely feels like it is alive with ancestor energy. All of these feel like they could have come out of like a family album, a family scrapbook, and I love that idea for pairing that with ancestor work. So while, again, it's not something that I'm currently doing, and I really don't have any plans to do anytime soon, it's one that I'm hanging on to because it is work that I want to at least, you know, dip my toes into at some point, and this is the deck that I want to use for that. It is also out of print, I do believe, so I'm much more hesitant to rehome an out of print deck because they are much harder to get a hold of if you change your mind later on. And also by the same creator is this Oracle deck, which is the Divine Muses. Now, I do believe that this deck is also out of print. Here's the backs. I've not edged this one yet. This deck has a very specific purpose for me. I always get into the guidebook when I work with this deck. So I pulled this one out when I want to literally get a muse to work with. So whether it's a muse of the Eternal Student or the muse of the Green Goddess, the guidebook for this deck is really as beautiful as the art is. It's really about the guidebook for me and being able to read the entries, read the stories, find out more about these muses, and to pull that energy into a reading. This is another one that pairs beautifully with that Heindel tarot that I mentioned in my last declutter video. It works beautifully for that if you want to pull a muse in. I feel like it would work beautifully to pull a muse in with your ancestor work. And of course, these two, because they are by the same creator, and you know, generally I'm not real big into pairing decks by the same creator because it gets a little too samey on my table. But these two actually work fairly well together in terms of a pairing because we're getting that sort of ancestral energy through the Antiquarian Tarot, and then we have the muse in the center to kind of provide that guide. So in this way, I'd be using it as like, this is my guiding energy, my muse for my ancestral work that I might be doing with the Antiquarian Tarot. I really do enjoy these two together. It's a great little combo. I have played with them a little bit. I've used the Muse Tarot with lots of other decks, so it actually does pair fairly well with quite a bit of my collection. It pairs really well with the Steampunk Tarot. Anything that has kind of that vintage, kind of darker aesthetic, it works really well with that. But as you can see together, they're quite beautiful. So I don't think either one of these are going anywhere in my collection because, like I said, I'm hanging on to the Antiquarian because if I want to do some ancestor work at some point, that's the deck that I want to use. And the Divine Muses I do tap into quite regularly. They're beautiful for journey work as well as spiritual work. I've used them a lot for various practices besides just as an oracle focus in a tarot reading. Also in the realm of decks going nowhere is the Coastal Curiosities. I just mentioned this oracle because this is by the same creator as the Peculiar Pathways Tarot, which we just looked at. I absolutely adore this deck. It's got such a wonderful, whimsical, fun energy to it, and it actually does pair pretty well with a lot of decks in my collection. I use it quite frequently with more of my minimalistic style decks because it works beautifully for that. I believe I have paired it with another deck that I've got sitting here in this basket, and we'll just see that one here in a second. We'll get it out and have a little play. I love the single keywords, the charming illustrations, and I do work with the art as well as the keyword. There's a little guidebook, I do believe, that comes. Yep, there sure is a little guidebook that comes with this, but I very rarely get into it. It's a lovely guidebook. The production quality on this creator's works is phenomenal, but I don't really feel that I need it, and I love that because I get whatever I need, everything I need out of just working with the keyword and the imagery, and there's always something unique and different that comes through working with this because, like, here we have stillness, we have the bug in the jar, but maybe I might be drawn to the mushroom over here or the plants over here, and I see something different and connect to something different. I feel like every time I work with this deck, depending on where I'm at and what I'm doing a reading on and my mood and how things are going, depends on what I will key into besides the keyword. That's a focal point and that's great, but there's layer of nuance here in the art that I can tap into, and I absolutely love when that's the case. So I have paired that with this other deck, which is also going nowhere in my collection. This is the Guided Hand Tarot. So here's the beautiful backs of these. Again, this is another collage style deck. It's got a sort of vintage hint to it, but it feels a bit more in the like maybe 50s, 60s, 70s, whereas like the antiquarian feels much, much older. So I feel like my collage here is being represented through across different time periods, and I really love that. This feels a bit more modern. It sits a bit more in the closer to today for me. It is a fantastic reader. I love this deck. It's got such a great, gentle, nurturing, fun energy to it. I love to pair it with the Begin Oracle, which I don't have over here because it's more of a just kind of generic collage deck. Doesn't really necessarily sit in a particular time frame. And I guess that's the thing with these decks. They're collage decks, the majority of them, but they also sit in a very specific time frame for me. This is one that I really slept on for a really long time. I was like, I don't need it. I don't need another collage deck, but I really, really enjoy working with it. It's got a great energy. Let's pair it here with the Coastal Curiosities just for fun, because again, this is a fun little pairing. It's a lot visually going on the table. So I rarely use more than a couple of cards because as you can see, it's very heavy in terms of the imagery and the art and what's going on. But I love that we've got this singular keyword, and I do love that the nature of the Coastal Curiosities leans me into looking at things from a different perspective, and the Guided Hand Tarot also does that because it's collage, because it's different, because it's unique. It really gives me the opportunity to look at things in a different way. And these two decks together are really fun. I've used them quite frequently. I've paired the Guided Hand with a lot of different decks, but this is a fun one. I often do like to pair it with my more minimalistic oracles as well. That's a great combo that I really enjoy working with. I'm mixing all of these cards up over here. It's funny. Anyway, it's a gorgeous pairing. I really enjoy the fun, cozy energy of it. I do have a couple other collage decks that sit in this time period, but they don't have quite the cozy feel to them that this one does. This one just, I don't know, it's kind of got like a hanging out with your grandma type of energy, but like if your grandma is like really fun and funky, it's not like the Guardian Angel Oracle, like the old one. That's totally a grandma deck. This is not a grandma deck in that terms. It's not like sitting on the front porch like crocheting grandma. It is grandma that is still out there like shaking her booty and having a drink and making you cocktails and telling you stories about the things that have passed and all the crazy stuff she got up to. Like, it's super fun, funky grandma. And I really adore it. I just think it's amazing. I have such a good time when I play with these decks together. And these two are really a fun, interesting combo that I think work really well together. Speaking of decks in that kind of similar time period, this is another fun one that like I really don't use as much anymore, but I've had for a really long time. This is the Housewives Tarot. Here's the fun retro backs, which are just amazing. And this is a deck that I think it was the third deck I ever bought. So I've had it for a couple decades. I absolutely love it. It's so fun and cheeky. Whereas the, Guided Hand has a kind of, fun, nurturing, kind of grandma-y type of energy, but like I said, fun, funky grandma. This definitely has more of a fun, cheeky energy to it. It's really playful. I have done a lot of work with this paired with the Zombie Tarot and the Curious Creatures. And they're phenomenal. I really love pairing this one with the Zombie Tarot. This and the zombies just together are amazing. There's just something about them that is so fun and funky and has such a great like sense of humor. If I want to have like a little chuckle, this is the deck that I go to. And I have another deck that I need to like take a look at. Maybe I'll just get it because it should be in this basket, but it's not. That kind of has this similar sort of energy, and I just want to take a look at it after looking at this one and see if I feel like they are too in alignment. I do think that this one, where it's like this is the like fun, funky, cheeky you would see on TV, and I'm thinking like back in the days of like I Loved Lucy, which is one of my absolute like all-time favorite shows. So this to me is like, a 50s comedy TV show. And it's got a great, great energy for that. And I really, really enjoy it. But I do have a couple other decks that kind of sit in this energy too. This deck I've had forever. Like, I don't know that I could ever get rid of it because it's one of those that like literally I've had for decades. And like, it still is in great shape. It's not really that worn considering, I mean, I don't use it a ton now, but I used it a lot when I first got it. So it's holding up really, really well. Let me just grab, even though they weren't in this basket, because they should be in this basket. And that's kind of the whole point of this series, is for me to actually go through and see what the heck do I have and do I need to keep it. So let me go grab those other deck. You legit know you need a deck declutter when you're like, I can't find the deck, but I found 3 cards. I actually found these under furniture. So clearly somewhere I have the Pulp Tarot. Here's the backs, and like, it's got a similar energy to the Housewives, but it's like movies. And like the cards have gotten ruined. And so I'm going to have to find this deck and decide if I want to keep it or at this point, because like half the deck is missing. It was in one of those boxes that's like super cute, but it doesn't actually stay shut. And now I don't know what I did with it. And they fell out, and they're like, there were cards missing, and I found some of them under the furniture, but like clearly I need to clean out. So somewhere I have the Pulp Tarot, which feels like it sits in alignment with the Housewives. And I think that like, as cute as the Pulp Tarot is, because I have, mine's now a hot mess anyway, I think whenever I find it, I'm just probably going to, like, I'll be honest, I'm probably just going to recycle it because like several of the cards have gotten ruined. And I'm just not going to repurchase it because I have this one. The other deck that I was thinking of is this deck here, which is the Lame Hype Tarot. And I have edged it. So see, this one actually sits more in alignment. I was thinking it was 50s, but no, this is more 60s, 70s, and I'm good with that. Even though it kind of sits in the same energy as the Guided Hand, this deck, oh, there's bad words. There's bad words in this deck. I apologize, but this deck is hilarious. It is so fun and funky, and this is like being in that time, like existing in that time. It reminds me of like the sitcoms. Like, okay, if sitcoms were allowed to be dirty back then, this is what they would look like. And like, I was born in 78, so I grew up with sitcoms from the 70s and 80s, you know, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were playing in my house, and that's what this deck reminds me of, and it's fabulous. I love it. And now that I'm looking through it, it does not compete with any of the things that I've shown so far. So like, that's fantastic. But it definitely has a retro, fun, cheeky energy to it. I love it. This is one that I pull out when I'm just like, I'm feeling snarky and I want to have a laugh and I want to have a play. And this is a great one for that. I have a lot of actually Oracle decks running around that pair really well with this. Funny enough, and it is mostly like my really woo kind of pinky pale, like Danielle Noel-esque. They're not Danielle Noel-esque decks, but that style of deck actually pairs really well with this. Because it kind of brings those two energies together in a really fun, playful way. So that's just a side note, because this deck should have been in here and it wasn't, because I recently made a bag for it, and that's why it kind of had made its way out of the collection. Okay, so let's go into a couple of decks that I'm like, I really don't know if I do need to keep them. Okay, this is the Rosebud Tarot, and I really, really like this deck. Oh, and see, I'm going to pull it out. This is the indie edition. This is available mass market, but the indie edition, I don't know what the mass market cardstock is like because I don't have it. The indie edition is on this beautiful linen cardstock, and this deck like shuffles like a dream. And then see, I'm going to pull it out and go, but it doesn't feel the same as, I was like, do I need it? Because I have the Guided Hand, but this again has a totally different energy than the Guided Hand Tarot does. So I'm like, maybe I will keep it because it does have a different energy. And I absolutely love the Suit of Earth. This is all these clay pots. I just think that's super cool. It does have a mix of, you know, some photographic elements. And of course there's photo collaging in it. It definitely has a bit of a vintage feel. But also it feels like it plays well in a modern landscape. I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of a nice little hybrid, whereas the other decks really feel like they sit more very, very firmly in that vintage style aesthetic. This one is like, it's vintage, but it's also just photo collage, and sometimes it feels like it sits more in alignment with that. Okay, so like personal story also, because I can't with this card. This is the problem. It's not that I can't in a bad way. Every time this card comes up, I did, when my great grandmother passed away, like, I don't even know how many years ago now that was, like probably 18, how old's my kid? Probably like 17, 18 years ago. I made a memorial card, and there was a picture of my great grandma standing in a field like this. It was a black and white photo, but she was standing in a field like this, just all by herself. She was about 20 years old. And I took it into Photoshop and I left her black and white, and I brought color out in the field. And I used this color, this pink, pastel-y yellow, because this has totally been her aesthetic. And so every time I see this, it takes me immediately to that moment. And I know I have to keep the deck because now I have that personal association to it. And I think I was talking about it in another declutter video where like sometimes there's just a single card that hits so personally and so profoundly that like anytime I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's absolutely why I keep this deck. Because if I ever felt like I wanted to connect with her, and maybe that's what this deck could be for me, if I wanted to connect with her and her energy, I feel like this is a deck that I could use for that. Very specific to her. I don't really do work like that in that sense, but if I ever wanted to, this would be a great deck for that. So while I was of just a moment ago, like maybe this is one I could rehome, yeah, I've changed my mind. No, because that one card and that personal association I have toward it with it. Okay, let's see how this one fares, because this is the Oracle of the Rose, and this is another really beautiful collage deck. And I have edged this one. Here's the beautiful backs. I edged it in this gorgeous pink color. And again, this is another vintage style collage. Lots of roses in this deck. It has a kind of steampunk energy to it. And I'll be honest, I kind of got this with the hope that it would work with my steampunk tarot. And while it does pair really well with that. I feel like the Alice one that I showed in the last declutter video that I did actually works better. And so I think, I don't know that this is one that I necessarily need to keep. So I think that I might be leaning towards letting this one go, because it doesn't, like, it's beautiful, but it doesn't do anything like super unique. I have other collage style oracles. I have other oracles that have roses. I have other oracles that have vintage photos like this. And it's not necessarily that, you know, the fact that this deck does it all in one is great, but I don't necessarily need all those together in one deck. And to be honest, like, I've pulled it out and I've used it a couple of times when I first got it, and I don't think I've really touched it since. So that's also another thing, right? I haven't touched it since, and I just don't know that it's one that I necessarily need. I'm not going to rehome it right away. Anything that I am decluttering is basically going into a purgatory box, and I'm going to sit on it for a little bit just to make sure that I really am ready to let it go. But this one, because it has such a specific, you know, it's roses, but it's not roses enough. Like, if I wanted to use a rose oracle, I have a literal rose oracle. And honestly, this was kind of like my steampunky Alice in Wonderland oracle. Like, it had that energy, but now I literally have an oracle that does that. So I don't necessarily think I need this one. It's beautiful, but I think it's going to go into purgatory for a while and see where it ends up from there. Let's talk about oracle decks that aren't going anywhere. This is one of my most beloved sort of vintage style oracle, floral, botanical decks. How many different keywords can I give to describe this deck? I've mentioned this deck many times before. This is the Botanical Inspirations. I keep the guidebook in here because I love this guidebook and I always use it every time. It's got such great succinct little messages. I'm not really a fan of the backs, but like, that's cool. I did edge it. This is my go-to vintage oracle. If I have any vintage deck, it doesn't matter what it is, along with a few of my fantasy decks actually, this deck is so versatile that it just slips in pretty much anywhere. I've paired it with everything from my Pagan Otherworlds to my Steampunk Tarot, to my Llewellyn Tarot, Like it just, I can throw it at anything. Mystic Palette Tarot, like anything. I can throw it at just about anything and it works beautifully. It is like the vintage or the dark half of the year version of my Hedge Witch Botanical, which you've probably seen that deck come out quite a few times too, because that is my like go-to white space floral oracle. If I need just an oracle deck to throw in the center and I don't have one that matches, that's my go-to for that. If it's anything that I would consider like sort of light half of the year, if it's anything that is sort of dark half or vintagey or sits more in like a shadowy energy, this is the oracle I go to. So like those two oracle decks kind of, I could get rid of, like, I'll be honest, I could get rid of every other oracle deck and use one of those two and be totally fine. I would never do that, but I totally could because they work in that way that like anything I throw at them, it's amazing. One of the things I really love about this particular deck is it does have a couple of keywords, but again, in the guidebook, it has these short little messages that are just always so spot on. But again, this one is not going anywhere because it is like my quintessential dark half of the year fall and winter oracle. It's like my fallback. It's like zombie tarot. Almost everything that exists on sort of the dark half of the year side of my room, it would pair with, and that is irreplaceable. So another vintage style deck that really sits kind of similar to that, and like, man, I can throw this with a lot of different things. This is my Pear Tree Court Oracle by the beautiful Danny Mystic. I love this deck. It's so good. It is a beautifully rendered deck. We have these like, I forget what they are called, like Victorian fashion things. There's a word for that and I can't remember. But there's so much, but there's all this beautiful negative space around it that it creates so much space in a reading, and it works beautifully with tarot. The keywords are phenomenal. Like I just always get like the best keywords. And it works great with a huge majority of my collection as well. This is another one that I can kind of just throw in there. It's so versatile. It goes with a lot of things. And I really, really enjoy working with it. It's got a great energy to it. It's just a really solid reader. Again, I don't really need more beyond the beautiful art and the keyword. Like, it gives me everything I need to just jump right in and get my messages, and it's just gorgeous. The last few decks in this basket I actually have, they're kind of like creator collections, which is really interesting. I had to pull this one out of my like basket of like the one sitting on my desk, my working decks, because this one I've actually been using quite a bit with my Persephone work, and it's just beautiful. But all three of these decks are by Broccoli Magazine, and they are some of the most beautiful oracle decks I have in my collection. The collage work in them is phenomenal. This is the flower oracle one. Here's the backs of that. The way that these decks have been collaged together is seamless. It's phenomenal. From a design standpoint, these are gorgeously produced cards. I love that we have the title, whatever it is, and then we have the 3 keywords because I tap into that all of the time. This one obviously is focused on flowers. There is sort of a suit and a system to each of these decks. So you'll see little subtle changes in the little colors on the accents. And that's because there are a couple of suits in here. I don't really work with the suits that much when I'm working with these decks. It's more about the art, the imagery, and those keywords, which I find to be really, really fantastic as spread positions. It's one of my favorite ways to work with these decks. And I think they're just beautiful. And they pair with a lot of the stuff that we've looked at so far. Again, the Flower Oracle is one that I've definitely been using for all of my Persephone work. So it's gotten a lot of use. So it's not actually in the basket currently because it's out in rotation. Let's go to this one really quickly because this one is the one that I've also used quite a bit. This is the Mushroom Oracle. Here's the backs of this one. This one works so well with so many of my kind of like fantasy fairy tale like energy. There's just something magical about the mushrooms. Like it feels like it's sitting in that space of you know, beneath, getting underneath in the growth and the underbelly and the shadow. Of the 3 decks, I would feel like this one leans more into the shadow, but it's not necessarily a shadow oracle by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely leans more that way when you compare it to the other ones. I really enjoy working with this one. I think this is the first one that they released, and it's the first one I purchased. I've used the heck out of this. I use it a lot in the dark half of the year. It's got beautiful art. Again, just the keywords, they're great for spread positions. So I can pull a single oracle and then pull my 3 tarot to really dive into what each of these keywords mean for me in that moment, what message is coming through. And it's just, again, beautifully, beautifully produced decks. They're among my favorites in terms of like production value, because they're just like, it's by a company who creates a magazine, a beautiful magazine at that. And they just do such a wonderful job. And this one's quite versatile, works for a lot of things in my collection. Now, the one that I've struggled with the most to use in my collection is the Seashell Oracle. And this one, I think just because I don't have like a ton of decks that really sit in this sort of energy. The backs are beautiful. There's always like a little emblem in the back, which is amazing. I really love this deck, but I haven't really found its place. I will keep it because it's part of this collection, and I basically intend to buy every Oracle deck that Broccoli Magazine creates because I think they're beautiful and I love having them as a collection. However, I haven't really found much occasion to work with this one. It has kind of a different sort of energy. It feels very, into the water, into the ocean. It's a little bit lighter. I don't feel like I have a ton of decks that really sit in this type of energy. And the ones that I do don't necessarily work with this sort of vintage style collage. And so it creates a little bit of a discrepancy there. So this one really is the least fitting in my collection, but I will keep it because occasionally there are creators that I just collect everything that they do. And this particular deck creator, Broccoli Magazine, is one that I will collect all their decks because like it's a Pokemon thing. I just need to have them all. But I think they're beautiful and I really, really enjoy working with them. I feel like this one actually might work well with the, let's just try it because I feel like it might work well with the Peculiar Pathways, and maybe that would be a good place for it. Again, this is collage and collage. It's a lot of art on the table. I probably wouldn't do any more than, 3 or 4 cards. Honestly, with the Broccoli Magazine decks, I do tend to pull 3 cards because it has 3 keywords, but I would probably not go more than that because like this is a lot of art on my table and it's a lot of energy, but I thought maybe they might actually go really well together because there's a lighter sort of energy to the Seashell Oracle. The flower one feels like it really sits very heavily in the botanical energy, into kind of, I guess, like flower magic and earthy and growth, whereas the Mushroom Oracle feels like it dives deeper than that. It's got a little bit of a shadow energy to it. Look at the circles. How cool is that? I love when that happens. Barnacle between the world and the 2 of Wands. That's pretty cool. Anyway, I feel like the Mushroom Oracle has like, it's a bit of a shadowy energy. So I feel like it would be too dark to pair with this one. This feels like it's working. It feels lighter. It feels kind of like a breath of fresh air. I like it. Look at this. The 9 of Cups, the arrangement is almost like kind of an inverse mirror of the crab. That's interesting. Just the little things you pick up along the way. Okay, I like this. I do. Because like I've mentioned many times before, although I collect creators, I'm not a huge fan of working with Oracle and Tarot by the same creator in the same spread. I generally like to mix things up because it feels a lot of the same energy on my table. So while I definitely have a place for the Coastal Curiosities by this creator, and it's beautiful and I use it with a lot of other decks, I feel like this is a great pairing for this one because it feels like it sits in the same energy. It feels light. It feels refreshing and welcoming. There's a little bit of a sort of healing energy to it. I'm really digging this. This is good. I love when we just mix deck collection with playing with pairs. It's so much fun. Playing with pairs is one of my favorite things to do. Absolutely love it. Okay. Yeah, I'm liking these 2 together. Okay, so that makes me happy because while I would 100% be keeping this deck, it's nice to know that I do have things that it pairs with well, and I really like it with the Peculiar Pathways. I think that's a good fit. So speaking of creator collections, the last few decks that I have in this basket are my Claire Mac decks. Again, not decks that I pair together, but I do definitely use in my collection. Let's take a look at the Rain Shadow Tarot. It is the newest deck. Here's the beautiful backs. It is got this gorgeous metallic matte gilding. Thank you very much. This deck is really, really beautiful. It's got a very rich, earthy energy to it. And while it is mixed media, I'm pretty sure it's mixed media. It looks mixed media. I could be wrong. It has that kind of mixed media vibe to it regardless. It definitely sits in a completely different space than all the other vintage style collage decks. And this one isn't necessarily vintage style. So it's just more of, for me, this deck, I guess it's in this basket because it feels like it taps into a sort of age-old wisdom. So while it's not necessarily vintage in its aesthetic, it feels timeless. And again, like it taps into that wisdom of something older, deeper, more knowledgeable than myself. And so that's kind of where it ended up. I really haven't found what oracle I want to pair with it, or if it really even has a particular oracle to pair with it. I've just used the tarot mostly on its own, played with a few other things, because I don't like, I could absolutely use the oracles by the same creator, but that's just not how I roll. I use those in a very different way. I think I have a video on how I use these actually. And this deck is fairly new. I think was it just this year or the end of last year that it came out? So I really haven't had much occasion to play with it yet. But I'm definitely looking forward to spending some more time with it because it's just gorgeous. And again, this is one of those, like, I just want to support this creator, and so I collect their work, and that's also a valid part of my collection. I definitely enjoy supporting creators and making sure that beautiful indie collections like these continue to be around for us. It's great when they go mass market because then they become more available, but I also want to be sure that I'm supporting these artists as they're creating these works. I think that's important too. So like, even if a deck comes out and I bought it indie and then it comes out mass market, like, I'm never sad about it because like this helps support them in creating that work, which maybe helps get it to that, mass market status where it is available to more people. So then we also have the 2 oracle decks by this creator. We'll take a look at the Faceted Garden because this is the newer of the 2 oracles. Both of these oracles have very different energies for me, and I use them in very different ways. Like I said, I do have a full video on how I work with these decks. Here's the backs of this one. I use these a lot with the Hush Tarot. So that's a completely different art style and into a different world. And I really enjoy the working with these two decks together with that one. It does something really interesting. Again, I think the artwork is really beautiful. It's a very recognizable aesthetic that Claire Mack has created here. Her decks have a very unique energy and a very unique feel. I feel the same way about Lennox Reese decks. Like, I feel like their decks also have a very unique aesthetic and energy that sets them apart from everything else in my collection that I have. And I really, really appreciate that. I love a deck that, even though they're kind of all, collage or mixed media or whatever, they all occupy such different spaces for me. This is a beautiful oracle. I really love the keywords. And again, I use these in very specific ways. This is a gorgeous representation of the inner landscape, I think. And that's kind of the way that I use it. Like, it's the inner self. And then I pair that with the illuminated earth. But here's the backs of this one. And I have, I edged this one myself in like a gold stamp, I do believe. This was the first Claire Mack deck, I think, that they created, but also that I purchased. And it is just this gorgeous, really versatile deck. For me, this one kind of represents like the outer world. So we have kind of like the macrocosm and the microcosm between these 2 decks, or the way that I work with them. And I've worked with them and I've played with them in various combinations, using them to represent various things. And that's really fantastic when I can find oracle decks like this that have that versatility, that one day it can represent, maybe the macrocosm for me and the whole outer world. And then maybe one day it'll represent me as an individual and as a being in a very, personal sense. And it's just the ability and the flexibility of this deck, or the decks by this creator, to exist in all those different spaces at once is phenomenal. And it really, for me, the way that I work with the oracle and tarot together, just in a general sense, It does depend on what tarot I'm pulling in, because depending on that changes the kind of landscape and the energy of the reading that I'm doing on the whole. But I really enjoy these decks. I think they're beautiful. The keywords are great. They're very versatile, and definitely something that I'm going to be keeping in my collection, because again, it's another creator that I'm just kind of collecting. So because this didn't have that many decks and it didn't take that long, let's talk about the fact that everything's still not going to fit. So my intention is to make things fit in the spaces that I have allotted for them, because I do have limited space, and contrary to what I might try to convince myself or my husband, I do not need all the decks. So I'm trying to decide like where all of these decks want to fit, and if they still want to stay in this vintagey sort of basket that I have going on. And as I was going through it, I was kind of thinking that maybe my Claire Mac decks, because they aren't really vintage, and I don't even know why they're in here, to be perfectly honest. Like, they do tap into that sort of ageless wisdom that I was talking about, but they don't necessarily like hit that vintage aesthetic, right? They're not retro. So I think I'm going to pull these out and find some other place for them to live within my collection where maybe they fit a little bit better. I do feel like they hit a very specific place in my collection. So that's another thing that I'm trying to do with this whole declutter, is also at the same time I'm reorganizing my office and trying to get my decks into small groupings of how I work with them, how I use them, and what I use them for. So when I'm getting ready to do some particular type of work, I have a specific place that I can go to in my office that has a selection of decks that is geared toward that work. It just really helps with decision fatigue and you know, deck paralysis when I'm trying to decide, because like I've got so many decks. Like, this is how I'm choosing to organize them currently, and that's been another part of this series, is trying to work my way through that. So I'm going to pull these ones out to put them elsewhere, and then I'm going to see if the rest of these fit back in here. I'm going to go ahead and leave my Flower Oracle in for right now, even though it's one that I've been working with, just to make sure that it does fit in this box. So another thing that I have going on is that I have decks that I'm putting into like, it's kind of storage, but it's easily accessible storage. So it's decks that I'm not going to be working with anytime soon, but that I do want to keep because I want to work with. And I think the Antiquarian is going to go in that space, because it's not one that I am actively engaged with, but I want to keep for other things. So that leaves us with the Peculiar Pathways. I think, did I do this right where they fit? And the Coastal Curiosities and the Guided Hand. Let's just see what I can get in here. Then I get to play rearrange the box. Like, I have room now. I'm going to have room. That's the thing. That's cool. So that might be able, the Antiquarian might be able to just go back in here because I'll have room. I think I'm going to put these ones over here. And then that leaves me with a little bit of space for some bags. So I have my 2 Oracle decks I'm going to leave up front, my Lame Hype, and my Housewives. And I feel like those 2 living side by side is appropriate. And then that just gives me my Divine Muses, which I can just tuck right there. Technically, I could fit the Antiquarian right here. And for right now, I will, but if I come across in my cleaning out another vintage style deck that I do want to hold on to, I will rehome this into that storage bin for decks I want to work with at some point, but just not right now. So that fits all in there beautifully, and I love it. Like, that's going to fit much better on my shelf. I'm going to find a new home for my Claire Mac decks that feel like they will fit more in the correct energy and what I actually use them for, which is not the same thing that I use these for. And the Oracle of the Roses is going to go into Purgatory, because that's a deck that I don't think I really want to hang on to, but I never want to be super hasty with rehoming decks, because sometimes that bites me in the booty. Okay, so that's all I've got for you this time for this round of deck declutter and collection video, taking a look at my vintage style decks. There might be more elsewhere around my office. We shall see as we continue this series. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.